Namaskar. I welcome you all to another video lecture of Sid Sir's video classes. I am Siddhartha sir and I am today present here with another fresh video. Today's topic is the history of making of Indian Constitution. I hope that you have liked our previous video on the basics of geography of India, where I discussed about the mountain regions of northern and southern India. So today it's turn about our Indian Constitution, and today's topic, as I have already mentioned, is the history of making of Indian Constitution. As you all know that Indian Constitution is the lengthiest constitution in the world, but it was not written in a single day. It took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to frame this constitution of India. It has obviously, like other constitutions, a very interesting history. So let us know the history of making of Indian Constitution. I am hopeful that you will like our video and you will obviously share our video and encourage your friends to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin the history of making of Indian Constitution. We all know that the British East India Company was formed in the year 1600 by a royal charter of the monarchy of England, and initially its prime objective was to do trade in India. So the Britishers came in India, and that time the Mughal Emperor Jahangir was there in the helm of India. It took time for the Britishers, the British ambassadors like William Hawking and Sir Thomas Roe, to convince the Mughal emperor, the mighty emperor Jahangir. But once they could convince the Mughal emperor, they started setting up factory and forts in different parts of the country. The very first fort was there in Madras. Its name was Fort St. George. But before that, they have already set up their first factory in Surat. Very soon the Britishers were busy with conflicts with other European powers who were already there in India, doing business in India. After overpowering all their opponents, like the French power in India, like the Portuguese in India, the Dutch power in India, the Britishers became the number one of European power doing trade in India. And there was a battle, its name was Battle of Plassey, on the 23rd June 1757, after which the Britishers, that the East India Company not only remained as only a trading company, but it started interfering in the administration of India. After the Battle of Buxar in the year 1764, the Britishers got the Diwani rights of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. That means they got the authority of collecting tax from these three provinces. And thus this trading company started making itself an administrative entity. And we saw that by the Regulating Act of 1773, Warren Hastings became the first Governor General of Bengal. This way, the British East India Company became the supreme power in India, whereas the Mughal emperor remained as a puppet king in India. 1757. 100 years after this 1757, there was another mighty war in India, which by the quotation of Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, we can say that it was the first war of independence. Yes, I am talking about the Sepoy Mutiny, which happened in the year 1857. At that time, Lord Dalhousie was not there, but he was mainly responsible for this war. So after this war was over, the British Parliament, they felt that the control of India should be taken away from the hands of British East India Company, and it should be given to the Parliament or the monarchy of Britain. So by the Government of India Act 1858, the power of India was transferred from East India Company to British monarchy, and the number one officer in India, his designation changed and it became Viceroy. Earlier it was Governor General of India. From 1858 it became Viceroy. Lord Canning became the first Viceroy of India. And from that moment, after 1858, the Britishers understood that if they wanted to do business in India, if they wanted to control India, if they wanted to rule India, then they had to make peace with the Indian princely states, because there were so many princely states in India, and we found that in the 1857 war, most of the princes fought against the Britishers. So they changed their policy and tried to befriend the Indian kings, and also they tried to be more relaxed in observing the Indian socio-economic culture. So now they started involving the Indians more and more in the administration. That we can see in the Council of Indian Act or Indian Council Act 1861, when 3 members were included in the Viceroy's Executive Council. And these 3 members were the Maharaja of Baroda, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. In the Indian Council Act 1892, we saw that for the first time the concept of indirect election came to the fore, and Indians were being elected in the Viceroy's Executive Council by means of indirect election. After 1892, let us go forward to Indian Council Act 1909, which is also popularly known as Morley-Minto reforms. Lord Morley was the Secretary of State for India, and his office was in British Parliament. He was a member of British Parliament. But Minto, he was the Viceroy of India. So Morley and Minto, they brought out these Morley-Minto reforms, which enshrined the concept of separate electorates for the Muslims. That's why Lord Minto is also known as the father of communal electorates of India. What happened after this? We saw that from 1914 to 1918 there was First World War, where the Indian soldiers were introduced in the battlefield for fighting for Britain. We also saw in the year 1916 the Lucknow Pact between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. So after this Lucknow Pact and the tremendous national movement in India, now the British government started realizing about giving to some extent autonomy to India. That's why in the year 1917, Montagu Chelmsford, actually Lord Montagu, who was the Secretary of State for India that time, Lord Montagu, he announced in British Parliament that Indians will be gradually introduced to responsible government. Now, what does the term responsible government mean? Responsible government means that the Indian representatives who will represent the common people, they will be directly elected by the people. So when they will be directly elected by the people, they will be responsible to the people, and that will be termed as a responsible government. So after the Government of India Act 1919, which is also popularly known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, the concept of direct election came up. Not only this, in the 1909 Indian Council Act, separate electorates were given for only the Muslims. Now here in the Government of India Act 1919, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, separate electorates were provided for the other communities like the Jains, the Sikhs, the Buddhists, the Indian women, the depressed classes, and also the Anglo-Indians. 1919 Act is also important for the introduction of bicameral legislature. What is bicameral legislature? Two legislatures as we see today, like Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha in the center, and in many of the states, legislative assemblies and legislative council. Such way the bicameral legislature, the concept of bicameral legislature came up after the Government of India Act 1919. The Government of India Act 1919 that introduced diarchy system in India, and it was also proposed that such commission or such act will again come up after 10 years after seeing the performance of this Government of India Act 1919. So as per the provisions of the Government of India Act 1919, elections were held in different provinces of India, and it was, as we know, that after 10 years another act was supposed to come, and for that one commission was supposed to be set up. But before the even expiry of 10 years, one commission was set up in the year 1927 that was known as Simon Commission. Under the chairmanship of John Simon, a 7-member committee was set up. But since all the members were European, and this commission didn't include even a single Indians, that's why this commission was boycotted by both Indian National Congress and Muslim League. However, Simon Commission was constituted in 1927. Simon Commission came to India in 1928, and the Simon Commission also submitted its report. On the basis of the report of this Simon Commission, 3 roundtable conferences were held in London. First roundtable conference in the year 1930, second roundtable conference in the year 1931, and the third roundtable conference in the year 1932. Gandhiji, the sole representative of Congress, he attended the second roundtable conference in the year 1931, but the results were not welcoming for India and especially for Congress. But before going further, I have to go back and discuss about 2 important things of 1928 one, another is 1929. When the Indians were several times demanding self-government or dominion status from the Britishers, then the Britishers challenged them to frame or form one constitution for themselves. Sri Motilal Nehru, the celebrated father of Jawaharlal Nehru and also a renowned barrister, he took up the challenge and he wrote one draft constitution, which is also known as Nehru Report. And the Nehru Report was produced in the annual conference of Indian National Congress that held in the year 1928 under the presidency of Motilal Nehru. Anyway, in the year 1929, in the annual conference of Indian National Congress, when Jawaharlal Nehru was the president of Indian National Congress, he demanded complete independence. So no more self-rule, no more dominion status. Now India's demand was complete independence or Purna Swaraj. Another important event we can find in the year 1934, when Manovendra Nath Rai he first announced that the Indians should have their own constitution, and for forming the constitution of India there should be a constituent assembly for the Indians only. So Manavendra Nath Rai was the first person who mentioned about the requirement or necessity of a constituent assembly for preparing the constitution of India. Going one step ahead, Jawaharlal Nehru in the year 1938 demanded that the Constituent Assembly for preparing the Constitution of India should comprise the Indians only, and the Indian members of Constituent Assembly, they would be directly elected by the people of India. 1939, Second World War broke out, and the Britishers involved the soldiers of India without even discussing the political leaders of India. So there was a huge hue and cry in Indian society. To contain this hue and cry of Indian society, Lord Linlithgow, the Viceroy of India in the year 1940, came up with his August Offer. It is popularly known as August Offer, where he mentioned that Indians will be given dominion status under the British government, and more Indians will be included in the Viceroy's Executive Council. Even the number of Indian members will be more than the British members. But it was boycotted and it was rejected by both INC and Muslim League. INC boycotted and rejected it because it mentioned about dominion status only, whereas INC's demand was complete independence. And it was rejected by Muslim League because now Muslim League wanted a separate state for the Muslims of India, Pakistan, which was not mentioned in the August Offer of Linlithgow. So it was rejected. After that, to discuss with the Indian leaders and convince them for helping the Britishers in their cause for war against the Germany Hitler, Sir Stafford Cripps came to India in the year 1942, which is also known as Cripps Mission. Sir Stafford Cripps came and he talked with several political leaders of India. He discussed with Mahatma Gandhi, he discussed with Jawaharlal Nehru, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Akali Dal leaders. But his recommendations were not accepted by either INC or Muslim. Mahatma Gandhi denounced it by saying that it's a post-dated check in a crumbling bank. Anyway, after 1942, we can see that in the year 1945, the Second World War was ended, and we also saw a change in the political power in Britain. Winston Churchill, who won the battle for England, was the Prime Minister, but he lost the election, and the new Prime Minister was Labour Party's Clement Attlee.
I am certain that this election has been one in which the electors have thought deeply on the fundamental questions of the future, and they realize that Labour is the party of the future, and that Labour's policy is the only policy that can lead us to peace abroad and social justice at home.
1945, the United Nations organization was set up, and there was a huge pressure on Britain to give India its complete independence. Under these circumstances, the Cabinet Mission Plan was sent to India. The Cabinet Mission Plan comprises 3 members. They were Sir Patrick Lawrence, A.V. Alexander and Stafford Cripps. The Cabinet Mission recommendation were to process for a constituent assembly for preparing the Constitution of India, and accordingly after 1946 the recommendation of the Cabinet Mission a constituent assembly was set up in the month of November 1946. So as per the recommendation of the cabinet mission, the Constituent Assembly of India was set up, and it met for its first meeting on 9th December 1946, in which 389 members were supposed to attend the program. Out of these 389 members, 296 were elected from the British provinces and 93 members were sent from the princely states. But the very first meeting was boycotted by Muslim League, and the princes also didn't send their representative in the very first meeting. After the decision of formation of another constituent assembly for Pakistan, the total membership of our constituent assembly, that is the Constituent Assembly for India, came down to 299. Out of this, 4 were Chief Commissioner provinces, and these Chief Commissioner provinces were Delhi, Ajmer Marwara, Kurg and British Balochistan. Later on, the British Balochistan was merged into the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. However, in the very first meeting, Dr. Sachidanand Sinha was selected as the chairman of Constituent Assembly. But we got the permanent president of the Constituent Assembly on the 11th December 1946, who was Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who subsequently became the first president of India. On the 13th December 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru he forwarded his objective resolution. This objective resolution is a famous resolution which ultimately became the preamble of Indian Constitution. This objective resolution was debated in the council hall, and after deliberations, detailed deliberations, on the 22nd January of 1947, it was passed as the preamble of Indian Constitution, which read that we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic and to secure its citizens justice, social, economic and political, liberty of thought expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. On the 29th August of 1947, a 7-member drafting committee was set up, and the 7-member drafting committee was chaired by the eminent jurist of India, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. The main objective of this drafting committee was to prepare the draft of the Constitution of India. The members of drafting committee were 7. So other than Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the other 6 members were Govind Ballabh Pant, K.M. Munshi, N. Gopalswamy Iyengar, Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, Muhammad Sadullah and T.T. Krishnamachari. The drafting committee read and discussed the salient features and good features of different constitutions and incorporated these provisions in our constitution. And ultimately, it took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to prepare this constitution. On the 26th November of 1949, the constitution was adopted, and on the 26th January 1950, it came into force with 395 articles, 8 schedules and 22 parts. We fondly celebrate the 26th January every year as the Republic Day of India. So here is a very short history how the Constitution of India was prepared. Actually, the members of the Constituent Assembly from different provinces were selected, and this was selected by means of proportional representation. For every 10 lakh population, one member was elected or selected. Where the Muslim population is more than 10 lakh, from there one member for the Muslim League. Where the Sikh population was more than 10 lakh, there one member from the Sikh community. This way members were taken for the Constituent Assembly. The eminent personalities of this Constituent Assembly, eminent personalities like Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, K. Munshi, all of them and others also, they debated again and again. There were total more than 7,000 amendments, and out of these 7,000 amendments, 2,500 amendments was discussed in the hall, and after that only this constitution came into being. So our constitution is the fundamental law of the land. No act, no bill, no ordinance can be formulated which can breach the provisions of the constitution. If any act is found which breaches or which is in contravention with the provisions of the constitution, this particular act will be termed as ultra vires, and this will be rejected, or this will become null and void automatically. Our constitution is the biggest book of law of the land. We respect it, and it is our duty to preserve the holy spirit of our constitution. Today, with this note, I conclude here. Hope you liked my video. I shall come up with other topics in our later classes. God bless us all. Thank you.